I did a survey of 3,256 people who reported getting better from 28 different health conditions when they switched to non-GMO and largely organic food. And the number one condition was digestive disorders, followed by fatigue, and there was overweight issues and brain fog and allergies, and down to autism, and even the lowest one was Parkinson's, and there was cancer and gluten sensitivity and diabetes, heart disease, so many different problems. Now, it's interesting that this list that I gave them in terms of the survey was not random. It was the same results that I had received from people at about 150 lectures, where I asked people live, what did they notice improved when they switched to a non-GMO or a non-GMO and organic diet? And they're the same conditions that one would expect to occur, many of them, because of the modes of action that are found in the GMOs, including the Bt toxin, which can poke holes in the cells of insects to kill them, and it can poke holes in human cells in the laboratory, and also the Roundup, which is a dangerous herbicide sprayed on the Roundup Ready crops, and also the GMOs themselves. Now, it's interesting that the same problems that got better in the humans that switched were similar in category, and sometimes very specifically, with the problems that got better in livestock and in pets, and the same problems or their precursors that showed up in the animal feeding studies where they force-fed the animals GMOs or Roundup. And these are similar conditions to the ones, or exactly the same, that have been on the rise in the US population, rising in parallel with the increased use of GMOs and the Roundup sprayed on them. So actually, if you look at this, we have this pattern of evidence, we have plausible modes of action, we have supporting peer-reviewed animal feeding studies, we understand the causal mechanisms very specifically in some cases and have theories for others. But what we're seeing, it's remarkable, is that of the thousands of doctors who are now prescribing non-GMO diets, and the people that switch to non-GMO diets, and often largely organic, which is important, that there is a consistent trend that a certain percentage of the doctor's patients get better immediately and either start getting better or have complete reversals. So that kind of multiple clinical evidence plus all of the other evidence gives us great confidence that GMOs, which are eaten continuously by people around the United States, more than their body weight by the end of the year, that's actually wreaking havoc on the health of the population. So let's talk about Roundup. Roundup Ready crops constitute about 80% of all the GMOs. And they're designed to be sprayed with Roundup herbicide. The Roundup actually penetrates into the tissues of the plants. It has a surfactant which helps it go into the plants. And then it ends up deposited in large part in the food that we eat. So if you look at the glyphosate residues, glyphosate the active ingredient, but there's a lot more ingredients. The other ingredients can be more toxic than the glyphosate. But let's just talk about the glyphosate. You end up with glyphosate residues in the food we eat in high concentrations. Now, Monsanto said, oh, it's completely safe. They said all this thing does is it blocks a particular pathway called the shikimate pathway. And that shikimate pathway is in plants but not in humans. And because we don't have it, glyphosate is safe. You can drink Roundup. Don't. It's actually been used for suicides around the world. Don't drink Roundup. But it turns out that Roundup and glyphosate have many modes of action. But if we just start out with shikimate, just starting there, the bacteria in our gut use the shikimate pathway to produce the precursors to serotonin, melatonin, dopamine. If we block that and we can't produce enough of those essential neurotransmitters, then we're talking about anxiety, depression, pain, problems with sleep, Parkinson's, all these different possibilities related to the neurotransmitter. And these are on our list of things that may be created and exacerbated with exposure to Roundup or glyphosate. In addition, glyphosate was originally patented as a descaler for cleaning industrial boilers and pipes. And the reason why is that it is a chelator. It grabs onto minerals and strips the walls of the pipes and the boilers. It's patented as a chelator. Now, as a chelator, if we drink it, if we have it in our food, it binds with the minerals, and the minerals become unusable. Now, minerals are important cofactors in all of our enzymatic activity. So all these pathways that are needed by the body to stay healthy, to detox, to grow, etc., all of them require certain minerals. And if those minerals are not available, then the workers sit around waiting to be paid or waiting to be given instructions, and nothing happens. And so the fact that it chelates minerals means that it could affect all sorts of aspects of our physiology, and many, many doctors believe that many of the major diseases are related to mineral deficiency. Now, glyphosate also causes mineral deficiency in the plants, in the Roundup Ready crops, in the animals that eat the Roundup Ready crops, and in humans that get the glyphosate doses, plus they eat the mineral deficient meat, plus the mineral deficient plants. And so we have a mineral deficiency epidemic, which is being exacerbated by Roundup. Now, it's also patented as an antibiotic, and it kills the beneficial gut bacteria, the kind of stuff that we like to get in yogurt and we buy the probiotics. That's the stuff it kills easily, not the nasty stuff like E. coli, salmonella, botulism, etc. And those can overgrow in the gut and cause what's called dysbiosis. And that dysbiosis, or imbalanced gut bacteria, there's a long list of diseases. Basically, I've talked to some people and they say basically every disease starts with an imbalance of gut. Very rarely it's not that. And so you have the mineral deficiency, long list of diseases, the gut dysbiosis, long list of diseases, and then there's the leaky gut. I talked to Zach Bush, who has pictures of the cells separating in the presence of glyphosate. He puts a little glyphosate and the human cells separate. When they separate, the tight junctions get loose. That's a system that's called leaky gut or hyperpermeable gut. And if that happens, now undigested food proteins plus chemicals and bacteria can go right into the bloodstream, and what happens is the immune system launches an attack. There's inflammation. Inflammation, guess what? Cover of Newsweek, it's linked to this long list of diseases. So now you have inflammation, long list of diseases. The leaky gut itself, long list of diseases: cancer, autism, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autoimmune disease. And all of those, plus the gut bacteria, plus the minerals. And then there's the mitochondrial toxin, and the mitochondria is linked to a long list of diseases, and it gets impaired because of glyphosate. So no wonder there's so many diseases linked to the consumption of GMOs and Roundup, and so many things get better when you stop. Now, it's important not just to think of Roundup in terms of Roundup Ready crops. It's also used to dry down or desiccate the grains like the wheat and the barley and the oats, and also it's sprayed on lentils and mung beans, and also potato fields and sweet potato fields and vineyards and citrus orchards. It's all over the place. And so the key is buying organic, which disallows both GMOs and Roundup. If you can't get organic, at least get non-GMO, because you know that stuff is filled. And other people would specifically avoid the non-organic oats and wheat and the legumes like lentils and mung, because they're very heavily sprayed and have a lot of residues. And because the United States government has sort of been in bed with Monsanto, they don't actually research and publish the list of the residues of glyphosate around, but it's pretty prevalent. And I haven't even mentioned glyphosate was declared by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, the WHO committee, as a probable human carcinogen. They said it definitely causes cancer in animals because there's enough research to show that. There's not enough research to show on humans because it's not ethical to give people glyphosate and see if they get cancer. But they did say that in the epidemiological evidence, there's higher levels of cancer where it's sprayed a lot, and also it causes mutations in human DNA, which is one of the ways they develop cancer. And so all those things check, 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 and they just didn't have enough human studies to call it a definite carcinogen. But it's linked epidemiologically to many different cancers as well. If you buy non-GMO bread, wheat is not genetically engineered, but wheat can be sprayed with glyphosate 3 to 5 days before harvest to dry it down, to force fast ripening, etc. And so you may end up eating glyphosate-laden food that's non-GMO. It can even be non-GMO project verified, but they don't check for Roundup, they check for GMOs. So actually the best thing is to have organic and non-GMO project verified together in the same. Now why would that be? Organic doesn't allow GMOs anyway. But the non-GMO project, if there's at-risk ingredients, requires testing to see that it's at least very, very low, if not non-existent, whereas organic does not require the testing. So if you have both on the same package, it's not allowed to contain GMOs, and it's been tested if there's at-risk ingredients, and it's low or non-existent. So that's the best. And if you can't get that, then organic, and if you can't get that, then non-GMO alone.
Okay. Zach Bush, did he talk about any other cells having trouble communicating intracellularly, or is it only the zonulin that holds the intestines together?
So in my discussions with many doctors and scientists, they describe many different aspects and properties of Roundup. And Zach Bush, for example, talks about intercellular communication as the basis for health and lack of it as the basis for disease. And then he talks about how glyphosate can interfere with that and also not only create the gaps between the walls of the intestines, but between the walls of all the different parts of the body. So we become a sponge for toxins, which is a terrible concept, but that may be happening. And so if just that is happening, if just the integrity of the walls of our membranes and organs start to split up, then you can imagine the range of different diseases that we could be developing. So it's amazing how this particular molecule can have such a destructive effect, not only in the human being, but also in the microbiome of the ecosystem, because it is a broad spectrum antibiotic and it is a weed killer, and it is so heavily used. It's found in rain samples and air samples, in water samples, etc.
Doesn't it also interfere with detoxification in the liver?
One of the pathways that requires minerals and may be impaired by the presence of glyphosate, and doctors Stephanie Seneff and Anthony Samsel wrote about this, is the P450 cytochrome pathway. And that is important for the detoxification of the liver. Now imagine if you impaired the liver's ability to detoxify. There's, I'm told, 80,000 chemicals out there, and very few have been tested, and many of them are known to be toxic. And a lot of the toxic things in our bodies gets escorted out of the body by the liver. Now, if you disable or impair its ability to detox through glyphosate, that means that all of these other toxins can become amplified because they get to stick around. And so it multiplies the impact of this molecule.
Okay. Tell me about the Arctic apple. I've heard some bad things about it.
There are two recent additions to the list of genetically engineered crops. There's not many of the crops. There's soy, corn, cotton, canola, sugar beets, alfalfa, Hawaiian papaya. It's also Chinese papaya, some zucchini and yellow squash, and also salmon sold and consumed in Canada. But there's also this Arctic apple and also this potato, the innate potato, and both are engineered using double-stranded RNA. Now this little tiny piece of RNA, just teensy-weensy, that's the technical term, that ends up having the same code or sequence with a certain DNA in the apple, and that it silences that gene because it matches up. And it silences the gene that creates the browning effect if you slice the apple. So these are non-browning apples, and they're designed for the pre-sliced market. So if you go on Amazon and you buy a little packet of pre-sliced apples, it may be one of these unlabeled as GMO, one of these Arctic apples. And it will stay uncolored. It'll just dry up and disappear. It lies about its age. We call it the Botox apple. So it's an interesting thing that the USDA researcher that I talked to had written an article. He's no longer with the USDA. And he described, he said, we don't have an ability to regulate, to test for the risk associated with this double-stranded RNA. Why is that? Because not only does it match up with a particular gene within the apple, but if something eats the apple, as in human, then that same double-stranded RNA might match up with a similar sequence in our DNA and silence it. So it is theoretically possible, and in my opinion, highly probable, that the double-stranded RNA consumed by people eating the genetically engineered apple or potato can reprogram our DNA expression. Now, we know that that happens in mice. They were able to show that they ate a double-stranded RNA and it changed the expression of their liver cells. We know that with honeybees, for example, they fed honeybees a single meal of double-stranded RNA and then checked over some weeks, and it turns out it altered the expression of over 1,400 genes, which is 10% of their genome approximately. So, and they actually picked double-stranded RNA that they thought was going to be a good control that would have no effect. So Monsanto, it's interesting how they try and project this. They say, oh, it's all destroyed during digestion, this RNA, so it will have no effect, and it won't get absorbed, etc. And yet at the same time they say they're using double-stranded RNA as an insecticide. So on the one hand they're saying it works, on the other hand they're saying, oh, it won't work. It's like they're saying to the patent office, it's unique, and then they're saying to the FDA, oh, it's the same. So they speak out of both sides of their mouth, and then they end up running the regulatory agencies that approve their own stuff, and that's a different story.
Yeah, it sounds like they speak out of every orifice. Okay, so tell me about McNeil and his pigs, and because there's been various stories about pig farmers and the effects of genetically modified foods.
In my Healing from GMOs and Roundup series that I did with Maggie Ostara, I interviewed 18 different experts, and one of the experts was Dr. Mike McNeil, who is an agronomist. And he told of an astounding story of running an experiment on a farm where they had 2,000 pigs in one facility and 2,000 pigs in another, and they fed the normal rations of GMO products to one that farmers normally do, and they had 400 deaths among these young pigs. In the other house with the other 2,000, they had one death over the same period of time, 400 to 1. And this other one, they took out all GMOs, all Roundup to nature. There was no glyphosate in the water. It was the same feed, except it was non-GMO, and it was not contaminated with glyphosate. They also were able to raise the pigs and move them on to the next stage earlier, so that the timing was better for the farmer because it didn't take as much feed or time. But this is an important thing to realize, that our farmers are losing animals and money. And other farmers I've talked to, they end up having, when they switch to a non-GMO diet, they reduce the amount of antibiotics and overall medicines substantially. One farmer was about 2/3, another farmer 3/4. That is a tremendous amount of medicine. Now, that means that there's tremendous suffering for the animals, suffering and death, a tremendous amount of medicine, which is also expense for the farmers, and it can also theoretically affect us because those end up in the animal, maybe at the time that we eat them. So we end up with a terrible cycle of destruction, suffering, and poison when we use these things.
Also, pets like dogs. I mean, some of your guests have said that genetically modified food adversely affects our dogs or cats.
People started coming up to me and telling me that their cats or dogs were switched to a non-GMO or organic diet, and they were dramatically improved. The coat quality, the itching, the diarrhea. I think one of the most important interviews I had on this was with a veterinarian called Michael Fox, and he wrote a syndicated column. He was called the pet doctor or the animal doctor. And he had 25 to 30 million readers through his syndicated column. And so he was writing regularly through the time that they introduced GMOs into the human food supply. And all of a sudden, he got a rash of letters from pet owners saying, my dog or cat now has diarrhea or itching or allergies or skin conditions that they'd never had before. And he wrote back to them saying, take them off of GMOs. And he has a whole file drawer full of letters saying, that worked, it got better. Now, he points out that the pet food industry uses the same foods that the human food industry uses, so that when the GMOs came into the human foods, it ended up in the pet foods, and that there was no other big significant difference at this time, and there was reversibility with the pet owners. And now I have all these veterinarians saying that when they put the animals on an organic diet, they get better. So we have a video at the petsandgmos.com website, 10 minutes, which we can hopefully convince every pet owner to switch to organic. And we have the list of the products that have been tested for glyphosate, so we know which ones have the extra poison in them. We have a list of those that are organic and non-GMO and that run with the organic practices. So I encourage everyone with pets, or if you know someone with pets, and you probably do, send them to petsandgmos.com, watch that 10-minute interview or 10-minute short film, and then make a decision that I think will be healthier for your animals.
I think you said like was a very high percentage of our pets or dogs that get cancer.
The cancer rate among dogs, I'm told, is way higher than any other mammal. I've heard 1 in 2, I've heard 1 in 1.6, but it's way higher. And it turns out that the urine of dogs has 40 or 50 times the amount of glyphosate, according to the research that I've looked at at a research lab. And that means that the amount of glyphosate's a carcinogen to animals, according to the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And it's in high levels of the animals, and the cancer rate is skyrocketing. And I want to see the numbers showing the line of increase in the use of glyphosate and the increased use of amount of cancer in the dogs. I don't know if anyone's compiled that. But what I'm hearing from veterinarians is they used to not see much cancer at all. Barbara Royal, who's in the film, said maybe once a month. Now she sees them every day. And it's not just cancer. And she finds that when she switches the dog or cat to the new food, 50 to 70% get better before she has to do anything else. Just the food, which tells you that's the culprit.
Okay. Tell me about Monsanto's ghostwriting.
What was interesting, I have this like 8 to 10 part series that I haven't yet posted. It'll be posted soon, of the attorney that represented the man that had cancer who won the case against Monsanto. And the Monsanto's lawyers forgot to do something to stop the release of these secret memos, and they were supposed to be doing it within 30 days, and they didn't. And the lawyer said, they haven't stopped it, I'm allowed to release it, and immediately sent it out to the press, sent it out to the world, and now we have millions and millions of documents made public because of a mistake by Monsanto's lawyers. And so we call those the Monsanto documents. And there's over 100 of them that are just smoking guns of real collusion and admittance of problems. And within that trove of documents, we have a plan, a battle plan, that was Monsanto's reaction to the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which hadn't yet announced that glyphosate was a probable human carcinogen, but Monsanto scientists knew that the research was there, that there was overwhelming evidence showing that it was going to be labeled in that direction, and so they had a battle plan, which is now public, to orchestrate outcry. And they had their front groups that were going to be given the talking points and their front people that were going to be given the talking points, and they were going to do all sorts of things to try and rattle the cage. And one of the things that they said was to ghostwrite. They said, we write it and we pay them to put their name on it. And so that was part of the plan. And they ghost wrote a bunch of articles saying that glyphosate was safe, and there was supposed to be independent scientists In one case, there was a panel. The independent scientists were supposed to act on behalf of just pure science, and so it wasn't just ghostwriting, but they actually conferred with and got paid by Monsanto. So they were on the payroll of Monsanto when they were at the time doing independent work, saying that they had never consulted with Monsanto. There was a situation where one of the articles that was written was edited completely by a Monsanto person. Went through and actually told one of the authors it has to be stronger against this IARC decision. And so he overruled one of the people that was on their payroll, one of these independent scientists. And if you look at the documents, this guy from previous times, not just the one that was orchestrating the outcry, there was a guy who was describing his year's activities. And it was ghost wrote this study. He describes how he ghost wrote a particular study. Now that study determined that glyphosate did not cause cancer, and it was well cited for years and years, and there it was, he admitted it. And another person in an email said, we ghost write. We write it, we pay them to sign their name, just like we did with that other study that this other person admitted. So they're acknowledging in these two emails that they, I don't know if it's illegal, but it's certainly unethical, wrote a study, did not tell anyone, and it came out in these papers, and yet it hasn't been retracted from the peer-reviewed journal. I was looking through the materials, and there was a study about the link between glyphosate and miscarriages. And there was a sentence in there that said, even though that's not statistically significant, there was a trend that suggests a possible association. That was crossed out. It was crossed out by Donna Farmer, who is Monsanto's toxicologist, and she added in a bunch of paragraphs to try and soften the article. And then you could also see crossed out was her name and the name of Monsanto. So she was there ghostwriting along with others and eliminating the fact that she was there. You know, don't look this way, I've never been here. And there was also sentences that she wrote in an email saying, we can't say that the full formulation of Roundup doesn't cause cancer because the research hasn't been done. And there's indications that she wrote that the full formulation might have caused the tumors in this particular study. Now, why was I looking for Donna Farmer's name? Because I debated her on the TV show The Doctors, a national TV show, and she said, I'm very confident in this chemical as a mother, and I could back it up as a scientist. Well, it turns out in private she was not so confident. So I contacted the doctors, they looked at the information, and I ended up on a full hour-long show, fully dedicated, along with the lawyer and a plaintiff, to the Monsanto Papers and the Cancer Association.
Also, I've interviewed a lot of people who are harassed by Monsanto, but there's somebody in Argentina that ran into problems, and that person I can't interview. Can you tell me if you know about the researcher in Argentina and what happened to that person?
Andres Carrasco? Sure, he died.
So can
Right.
you mention that?
A lot of scientists who discover problems with GMOs or Roundup are attacked in the press, they're threatened, etc. And there is an actual budgeted item in Monsanto's budget called Let Nothing Go. So they don't let anything go on social media. They have a bunch of trolls that'll attack it, and also especially with scientists. Now normally the attack is through words, but Andres Carrasco discovered that glyphosate, or Roundup, is linked to birth defects. And he published an excellent article in Argentina, and he and others were going to give a talk outside of maybe 5 hours from Buenos Aires, and an organized mob of about 100 ended up physically rushing them. He got into a car and locked it, and they beat the car for 2 hours, but two of his friends, one was paralyzed, one was knocked unconscious. It's a very serious issue. And it may have been organized, for example, by one of the farmers who was using Roundup in his Roundup-ready fields, because Argentina is basically an ocean of Roundup-ready soybeans. And they spray by plane, so they do farming without farmers. And the spray ends up on the peasants who live nearby, and the cancer rate in one area has gone up about 300%, and the birth defect about 400%, and in one small area the birth defect is up over 70 times, and they're linking it to the Roundup. In fact, Dr. Carrasco's research found the same type of birth defects in his laboratory animals, I think it was frogs and chickens, that that was found by the peasants in their communities. And it's just been a tragedy. Horrible, horrible birth defects.
And anything else you'd like to add? You give a plug for your film and organic food, and let's get together and make this happen.
Yeah. We have been enormously successful at the Institute for Responsible Technology, exposing the health dangers, exposing the corruption, and getting the information out. We pioneered the basic description and dissemination about the health dangers, and that has taken hold. In fact, about half of Americans are concerned about eating GMOs, up from 0, and that is largely because of the discussion about the health dangers. And that is enough to create, or start at least, the tipping point, which is underway, where the food companies are eliminating GMOs in order to protect market share. Not to protect the health of their customers, but to protect market share, because that's what's driving their decisions, financial. We need to get the information out that it's not just non-GMO that's needed, we need organic, because especially the Roundup is being sprayed throughout the whole food supply. So we need to get the information out about eating organic as the priority and non-GMO as the second. And for that, I'd like to recommend a film that Amy Hart and I did called Secret Ingredients. So far, virtually every audience I have interviewed, everyone in the film is more vigilant, plans to be more vigilant in eating more organic than ever before, because we have actually people healing from serious diseases right in front of you, chronic conditions right in front of you. 2 families with autistic boys, no longer autistic, 92 couples that were infertile, have children, switched to an organic diet. So much evidence, and it's backed up by the doctors who see the same effects in their practice, in a certain percentage, backed up by scientists who describe why this is occurring. It is the most powerful way of basically converting someone to an organic diet that I have ever seen. And I would like to encourage people to not only see it, but to use it. You know, if you're the choir, fine, you may be eating organic, but arm the choir is my job. Get this information to the choir so that they can finally convince their parents or their kids or their sister or their brother or their friends, or show it to their community. We've got to get this out, because just like we now have a tipping point underway for GMOs, we want a tipping point. We want a tidal wave, a global transformation for organic. And I don't know of a better way, because if I knew of a better way, I would have done that. So that's why Amy and I spent years and years creating this film for this effect. So I want to encourage people to look at the film Secret Ingredients and share it with others.